Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Welcome back to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, sponsored by our friends at Trailtopia. We've got a pretty well-known guest today for episode number 6. Zach Davis hiked the Appalachian Trail in 2011 and embraced the experience to such a degree that his hike morphed into a career. He wrote a particularly influential book about the mental aspects of doing a long-distance hike, and it has become a bit of a staple in hiker libraries. Of even more significance has been his website, thetrek.co. This is a site packed with information, other hikers' blogs, and other hiking-related stuff. We had a really good chat, and I was struck at how thoughtful Zach is. He'll be along in a minute, but before we get to Zach, we've got this. Do you remember those cold, wet evenings on the trail when you pitched up at a shelter and there was nothing you would have rather had than a beautiful, hot, home-cooked meal? Well, apart from actually going home, you could try out one of the delicious meals from Trailtopia. Why not dig into their spectacular jambalaya with its authentic Creole flavour? Or how about their beef stew, which is loaded with beef, potatoes, carrots, mushrooms, corn, green beans and green bell pepper in a fantastic beef gravy? Go on, try them. Trust me, you're going to love them. Trailtopia, the best of home cooking away from home. Not only do we have Zach on the show today, but with Dr. Lynn taking a well-deserved break from the show, I've added an interview with Vince Robichaud, the guy who started and owns Trailtopia. Several listeners have written in to find out more about the company, so I thought I'd introduce Vince to highlight his backpacking and cooking credentials. He isn't just a guardian angel to our shows, he's put his money where his mouth is on other outdoor projects as well. Vince will be on after Zach. To finish up the show, we'll have the second part of Chapter 4 of Walking with Spring by Earl Schaefer. I hope this isn't bugging you by splitting the chapters. It's just that I'm always aware of how much I can go on and don't want to outstay my welcome in your lives. When I do split up the chapters, I kind of blend in the end of the previous week straight into this week to remind you where you were. By the way, Zach very respectfully asked me if he could use a curse word in our interview. I said that he could, but I've since worked out how to bleep it out. I know that several youngsters listen in, so I've decided to make sure that in future I don't have to mark episodes as explicit, because that one word would have made it explicit. So, when you hear a beep, know that I'm not really censoring, I'm just keeping the youngsters involved, and that must be a good thing for everybody. Now, beep and all, here is Zach Davis, or Badger. Okay, I'd like to introduce Zach Davis. Hi Zach, how are you?
Hey Steve, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
I'm good. And thanks for coming on. Zach is the founder or owner of the Trek website and the writer of the book Appalachian Trails, and latterly the writer of the book, is it Pacific Crest Trials as well?
That's correct.
Okay, now first things first, are you Badger or the good Badger? I'm not terribly sure which you are these days.
Yeah, it depends on who you ask. For a long time, people knew me as the Good Badger. That was the alias name for my personal blog, which I've kind of fallen off with in the last few years.
Yeah.
On trail, I'm just simply Badger, though.
All right. And where'd you get that name then?
It was kind of a neurotic decision to give myself my own trail name. Partially, so the origin is I went to the University of Wisconsin. They are the Badgers.
Of course.
That's where the Good Badger came from. I just like to play on words, good, bad. And then I wanted to keep my trail name consistent with my website name, thus just Badger. However, if I could go over and do it again, I definitely would have gone on the trail name list and letting the fellow hikers name me. But I have a name and I'm sticking with it.
Well, that's interesting actually, because I looked at I reread about 50% of your book, because I read it. One of my first Appalachian Trail books was your book, and it says very for somebody who didn't do much hiking before, you seem to know a lot of stuff in terms of advice and things like that. And there was a section about things you might do over again, and I was struck by the phrase, "If I try to beat the AT will beat me." The things you learn on the trail that the AT itself is gonna beat you. I think that is really, really on the point. Can you explain to people what that means to you, that expression?
Yeah. So I didn't have much going for me going into my through hike. The one thing I think I had an advantage with is I was put in touch with a former AT through hiker by the name of Ian Mangiardi, also known as Dusty, part of the Dusty Camel, was a popular gear review website back in the day.
All right.
But he was very generous with his time, and I certainly took full advantage of that. And a lot of the things that I was curious about was not so much the gear, but the can I swear on the podcast?
Yeah, if you like. I'll have to make it an explicit episode, which cuts out a couple of people, but you can edit it if you wish. I'll edit. You can swear as much as you like.
Okay. Well, I was curious what the mind were going to be, for lack of a better term.
That is the lack of a better term, by the
way. And he was very forthright about the fact that there's going to be a lot of tough days on trail, and you just got to roll with it. You got to accept those challenging situations, and not fight against them, but just take them as they come. So that's kind of. That was the origin for my mentality for, not fighting against the trail, because the trail will ultimately win in that situation.
Absolutely. And I suppose this was, I asked you that question in the context of your name, the fact that if you'd done it again, you would actually allow yourself to be named. And I'm sure, I'm not sure I would actually, but I was reasonably happy with mine. Now, you have a...
So actually, before you go on, I'm curious, did you give yourself your trail name?
I did, and the reason I did was because I found I wore a soccer shirt for my favourite soccer team in the UK, and they were, even though they were always lousy in all their history, for some reason their fans called them the Mighty Blues, and I was a lousy hiker because I'd never done it before, and I was wearing blue, so I became the Mighty Blues when I discovered the shirt. And so I just became Mighty Blue. And everybody I interview who knew me on the trail just refers to me as Mighty Blue, as if that's my christened name,
Yeah, no, it's funny. Even with Facebook, still to this day, there are people that I know them as their trail name.
Yes.
It's just, it's something about the context of meeting someone on trail, and especially in the situations where you don't actually learn their real name on trail, which I feel like is becoming a little bit more rare today with the way we interact with social media. But
I think you're right.
I like knowing people solely by their trail name.
It's kind of weird, though, isn't it? Yeah. I'm sure everybody knows your real name. Now, you've got a relatively short history with long distance hiking. Before you hit the AT in 2011, what was your outdoor life like? Did you do much hiking at all?
Not much outdoor life whatsoever. I was a casual runner. My exercise was pretty much running in basketball, pick a basketball. I'd go on the occasional day hike, but for me, 5 miles was a long hike at that time.
All right.
And that's my recent history before the trail, like probably 3, 4, 5 years leading up to my through hike. Before that, I was a bona fide couch potato, fat kid, played video games, about as lethargic as it gets. So, that's not too much in my background. It's funny because we used to vacation out in Colorado. All my family was from Colorado when I was a kid, and my parents would have to entice me up the trail with peanut M&Ms to get me to continue walking.
Now, there's an irony. Peanuts on the trail.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I've come a long way.
That's funny. So what was it that actually persuaded you that a 2,000-mile walk was exactly what you needed? How did you sort of get into this?
The trail seemed like an appealing option to me, largely just because I was not happy with my life. I was depressed, working too much, too connected to my devices, especially my laptop. So the desire to through hike was born from dissatisfaction. It was presented to me. I was out at the bar with a buddy at the time. This was about 6 months before embarking, and he told me that for his 30th birthday, he had this dream to go hike the Appalachian Trail. And that was the first time I had heard those two words put together. I had no frame of mind for what the AT was. I'm from the Midwest.
I'm surprised. I'm really surprised at the number of people, Americans I've spoken to, who didn't know the trail even existed, several of which lived not too far from the trail. It really has kind of shocked me on this.
Yeah. Especially now being so immersed into it, like I'm always shocked when I run into someone who's not familiar. It doesn't happen too often. I think, part of it was just being young, but like hiking is not part of the Midwest culture really at all.
Right. So what happened? So what happened then? This guy said he was going to hike the Appalachian Trail, and you were, as all the best things happen, you were in a bar having a drink with him, no doubt.
Right. Yeah.
And it seemed a good idea to you.
Yeah. Right. So I'm at that stage in my life. I'm kind of at the height of my dissatisfaction. And he was explaining this footpath that goes from Georgia to Maine, and I just got this sensation in my gut, and in this unmistakable sensation that like it was terrifying, but something was pulling me to it. It had this real magnetic force, and right there on the spot, I committed to joining him. I'm not even totally sure if he ever invited me, but I invited myself. And even after waking up sober the next morning, the idea was still very exciting to me. So. It was at that.
What did you think you'd get out of it, or was there no real plan? You just went into it because you thought that was what you wanted to do, or were you just so pissed off with life in general that you thought you needed something to something of this nature?
Yeah. So at the time that I committed to it, there wasn't anything I was looking for, like from the experience per se. Mostly, I was just looking for something that was a complete change of pace. And I knew I wanted to do something that was 180 degrees from what my current life was, and that
certainly was that, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And had the guy himself been a hiker before?
No, he had more outdoors experience than I did. He was a Boy Scout. He had gone camping before, but I wouldn't describe him as an outdoorsman. So yeah, certainly more experience than me, which is not saying much.
Right. Now let's talk about this then. So when we spoke before about you doing this interview, you told me that you thought it was important to find your why. What was your why, and why do you think that matters to long distance hikers?
Yeah. So I had a lot of different whys, and I think for like a lot of people that evolves while you're on the trail. But I knew that the one thing before leaving was I was looking for a challenge. I think in our culture today, we're really deprived of a rite of passage. And like, although going through university is a challenge, and I think that's a path that many people take, like it's not too dissimilar from the academics that we're used to. And I think it's challenging without any real fulfillment. You get this piece of paper at the end, and then a lot of debt and no guarantee of a job. Yeah. There's no true sense of accomplishment, and there's no physical struggle. I think that's something that, we're missing out on our society nowadays. And certainly that was the case for me. I lived the most sheltered life possible.
But did you feel that then that you needed the physical struggle, or do you just feel that now in retrospect?
No, I definitely, that was a huge part of it for me. I knew it was a challenge unlike anything I had faced before. In addition to the hiking, but also, figuring out the outdoorsman, the backpacking aspect of it. Like, I didn't know any of that stuff. So not only would it make me a phenomenal hiker, but it would make me a very competent outdoorsman. And those were two characteristics that I did not possess at the time. But
you wanted. That's interesting. You actually knew that you wanted them. That's quite interesting.
Yeah.
The mental aspects is really one of the main thrusts of your book, The Appalachian Trails. I'm going to ask you in a minute about the lists that you made when you were preparing for the trial, which I thought were great when I looked through them. But how did you know to do this stuff? Because you hadn't been on the trail, you didn't know what it was like, and yet you knew somehow intuitively that you needed to do something to prepare yourself. And I don't really know how you got that.
Yeah. So going into the thru hike, my hypothesis was that it was going to be much more of a mental struggle than a physical struggle. And I think it came from a lot of different directions. One, it was just kind of guesswork on my behalf. That seemed obvious that, once you acquire the basic skills of backpacking, and you've been hiking for a few weeks, that looking at something that's multiple months long, living outdoors for months on end, like I could put myself in those shoes and anticipate the fact that, I get lonely and homesick and all those things. But also,
yes, check.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But also talking to Ian, he reiterated pretty much everything that I suspected, and I think was able to give me much more of a visual picture of what to expect. So, I knew I had a pretty good feeling that my mind would be my greatest asset, or potentially my greatest downfall in this journey. So I spent the bulk of my training getting my head right for this thing, because at that time in my life, I don't think I was very mentally strong, and I knew if I was going to accomplish this, and like I was aware of the statistics at the time that 75% of people don't. That's where I wanted to focus my energy.
I admire you for that, and I know I remember when I read this, it was unlike any other Appalachian Trail book I'd read. They're all about how, as is mine, I guess, how much food you've eaten, how fat how much weight you've lost and so on. But yours was almost immediately like this, and I was struck by a number of things when I reread it, and I don't recall reading some of these things. All these lists that you prepared before you started. Tell us about those lists that you made while you were preparing for the trail.
Yeah, so growing up, I was a big fan of the self-help psychology style books, and Tony Robbins. Right. Tony Robbins was a huge inspiration for me, and I think that might be where I first read or got that concept. I have to double check. It's been probably 20 years or so since I read his book. Honestly, I was reading it at a very early age. But yeah, I knew, because a lot of people go onto the trail with the motivation of, why not do this? Why not through hike? And as you and I both know, the trail will give you plenty of reasons. There'll be a lot of days where you ask yourself
more than enough.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, if you don't have a convincing answer to that question, like why am I hiking, especially in the throes of battle when you're hiking through multiple days of rain, or you've got blisters covering your feet, you're going through an injury, it's very mundane, whatever it might be. If you don't have a compelling answer, that is definitely going to increase your risks of throwing in the towel, because for a lot of people, they've got a pretty good life back at home, even if they're not crazy about their job. Like they've got all their basic needs met. They've got the first 3 rungs on Maslow's hierarchy covered, and being out on the trail takes that away from you. So so I find it to be a very important practice to really spend a lot of time and allow yourself to get emotional about the reasons why you are hiking. And I think that practice of really digging deep is exceptionally beneficial, because if you don't allow yourself to find your core reasons, then when that moment strikes, why am I doing this? You don't have a convincing answer, then you're back home, and then you're kind of on the same life path that you were before, where
But I agree with that. And I understood the reason for the list. But then you actually went out on the trail in the expectation that you might get a job with Google, which of course is the job that any tech guy would want. Why wouldn't you? And that didn't work out. So when you went out on the trail, were you ready to be dragged off it? I know you were dragged off it for a while because of this interview, but were you ready to come off almost at a moment's notice had you been offered the job?
No, and I was upfront about that even if I were to be accepted for the position, that I wouldn't be able to start until after the journey. And that was actually
right.
That's a good question, because my mom was proposing that hypothetical scenario to me, and I told her the exact same thing, and she's like, well, the trail's always going to be there, blah, 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 blah. But even at that time, I knew that finishing the trail was so much more important to me than really any job that could have been proposed to me. So
So you knew about this. Sorry to interrupt, but I've got it in my mind, and I just really want to ask about it. So you knew about this. You had this potential job there. You had to go through a phone interview and then a face-to-face when they actually flew you out there. So you're obviously in the running for it. In the time that you set off from the date you started until I can't remember how long it was after you started, I think it was 2 months after you started, you were called for the interview in San Francisco, I believe. Had you made up your minds that you were going to finish this trail come what may? Because if they may have interviewed you and said, we want you to start next week, what would you have said then?
I mean, it would have been tough, but I definitely would have turned the job down. And I know it's easy for me to say that, having that not worked out, and my career path is in a good direction right now. But I felt that way with wholeheartedly the entire time.
Man, you really got into it quickly then, because for somebody who didn't know about the trail, have the possibility of a job with Google, and yet you would have turned the job down. That's quite something to admit, I must say.
Yeah, it's ironic because, after ultimately I did not end up getting the job, and I was distraught. So it's funny to think that, I would have turned it down willingly had they offered it to me and said that they needed me to start before the end of the trail. But I think the assumption I was working with was that they were flexible, that they were willing to wait the whatever amount of time they needed for me to finish the trail. I do have to give them credit. They seemed to be into the fact that I was through hiking the AT at the time, and that was never a detractor, despite the fact that, I walked into the interview looking rather disheveled with like bright blue trail runners and a suit that was too big because I was borrowing my friend who's 6'1". I was borrowing his suit. So
I saw the picture.
Yeah,
that made me laugh. The picture, yeah. You weren't rocking that suit. I'm going to tell you, Zach. You really weren't rocking that suit.
Certainly was not winning any style points.
Funny. So look, you were set off, and so how did your lists prepare you, and did you alter your perception of the trail while you were on it, or did what happened to you match with what you expected to happen to you?
I mean, I was definitely punched in the face. In addition to the Google thing, about a week after finding out that I didn't get the job at Google, which which demolished my ego. Then I contracted West Nile virus, which I didn't learn until after the trail. I knew something was very wrong. I went to the hospital twice while on trail, but I got very, very sick, and that was about halfway into the hike, I think, when I got back from. So we took a side trip to Baltimore. I think when we hit Harper's Ferry is when the symptoms really started being aggravated. When
did I think you contracted that? And how would you contract West Nile virus?
So that's an insect-borne disease that comes from mosquitoes.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Right. Cool. That's bad luck, isn't it?
Yeah. I thought for sure that I had contracted Lyme disease because, as you know, that's rampant in that part of the country. But I was tested a few times and it came back negative. So I was a little bit baffled because my symptoms were so severe. But the best hypothesis that the doctors could give me was that I was dehydrated, which I knew was not right.
Right. So was it very debilitating for the rest of your hike then, or did you manage to have treatment after Harper's Ferry?
So it was pretty debilitating. For a stretch of time, I was sleeping between 10, 12, 14 hours a day. When I was hiking, there were bouts of dizziness and nausea. I was battling persistent headaches. My head didn't feel right for the remainder of the hike. But because the second time I went to the hospital, they did think that it was dehydration. They gave me a saline solution via IV, and actually did feel better after that. So I'm aware of the fact that there probably was nutritional issues that were playing a role in any symptoms that I was experiencing as well. So at that point, my mom started to send me, being the worried Jewish mother that she is, started to send me an expensive electrolyte supplement at most of my town stops. So I was very diligent about staying properly hydrated, which is funny because I was drinking so much water prior to that actually I think I had given myself hyponatremia, which is a condition where you're drinking too much water and you're not getting enough sodium in your diet. So I was trying to do the right thing.
So that, I presume, was the toughest time you had on the trail. And this is my last question about your lists because I was fascinated by them, really. Did an item that you put on your list help you get through that bad time? Did you always go back to your why and make sure it reinforced your desire to stay on the trail?
I didn't, to be honest with you, I didn't revisit them all that much. For me, the beneficial process was actually writing them down. Cause I think there were reasons that always existed in my subconscious, but writing them down really brought them to the forefront of my mind. And like from that point, it always stuck with me. So I didn't have to read it. Like it was kind of always in my mind. But I knew as soon as I set my first foot on the trail that I wasn't going to quit until I made it to the end. Like I'm a very stubborn person. And with or without all the mental training that I had done, I probably would have finished the trail just because I am that stubborn. But for me, this was a practice for me to actually enjoy the trail and actually get meaning from it, as opposed to just trudging through my own misery. Yeah.
Well, I remember as a kid, badgers were referred to as stubborn anyway, so I think that might have had something to do with it. You're a stubborn badger. Now, this is more of an AT show than anything else, but I know that you hiked the PCT this year, which is 6 years between your two long-distance hikes.
Right.
Why did you do this one? Why did you feel the need to go on another long distance, or have you hiked intermittently in between?
So I've done some shorter trails in between. I've done the Colorado Trail, the Wonderland Trail, a lot of shorter trips in the Colorado area, which is where I live. But I mean, that's an astute observation. Most people that do multiple trails, they have at most 1 year in between their through hikes, just enough time to save up money to get back out there. Yeah, for me, I was so sick
just enough time to get rid of the smell, I thought.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, so you're just about cleaned up after about a year off the trail, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, how sick I was after the trail from the West Nile virus, and the symptoms lasted for about a year and a half after my hike.
Oh, right.
It just left such a bad taste in my mouth that spending time in the wilderness was really not appealing to me. It wasn't until that I started to get my health back in order that backpacking really started to come back into my life. And, I think the desire to hike the PCT was probably there before this year, but with doing the website full time, I couldn't justify taking that much time away from it. So this was the first year where, we've got a full-time editor now. So she was able to keep the website afloat in my absence. But prior to that, I think it probably would have collapsed had I been gone for that long.
Yeah. And do you think that your experience on the AT enhanced your enjoyment of the PCT? Obviously prepared you for it, but did it actually enhance the enjoyment? Yeah.
That's a good question, because I'm a firm believer that the Appalachian Trail is the hardest thing that I will have ever done. And a part of that's because the AT is a harder trail than the PCT. But just my experience between the Google thing and then much more so the illness that I was battling for half the trek, going through that was much more difficult than anything I faced on the PCT. And we did the PCT quickly. We hiked it in 100 days, which is a pretty aggressive pace.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Most people hike it in about 5 months. So
that's about 25, 26 miles a day, isn't it?
Yeah,
it is, isn't it?
The trail's 2,650. We missed about 100 miles because of fire closures. So yeah, we averaged about 25 and a half miles per day. So yeah, in a lot of ways, there was a lot more discipline that went into this hike than my previous hike. On the AT, obviously, there was no schedule. I took zeros when I wanted to take zeros, Neros when I wanted to take Neros. If I wanted to sleep in, I would do that. On the PCT, I think we had a total of 5 zeros, and a lot of that was just because my fiance was coming out to visit. So we had to time it around that. But yeah, we were, there was a 45-day stretch where we were averaging over 30 miles. And that includes obviously going into town and resupplying, doing laundry, showering, etc. So yeah, there was definitely a lot of discipline that went into this hike. But to answer your question, the AT is definitely, I think, the hardest thing I'll ever face, just because I had to endure a lot out there, and I, knock on wood, hopefully don't have to face anything like that on the trail again. I
asked this question of a couple of people recently. When you're old and grey and you're thinking back on your life, which one is going to bring a smile to your face, the PCT or the AT?
I love...
Or the biggest smile. The biggest smile, sorry.
Yeah, I love the PCT. It's a beautiful trail that I think objectively there's much more scenic stretches of trail on the PCT, but I think
Yeah.
the character building that I got out of the AT, both in terms of just like exposing me to the outdoors and the struggle that I went through. I got so much more out of that hike that I think the AT, I hated it more, but I also loved it more. So I think for that reason, it'll bring more of a smile to my face.
Yeah, fantastic. Hated it more, loved it more. And you came back from the AT when you came back in 2011. In fact, when you went out there in 2011, you said you were depressed. And I understand when you came back, you had that apparent phenomenon, post-trail depression.
Yeah.
How did that manifest itself in you?
So it was hard for me to separate, I think what the traditional post-trail depression is and just the physical symptoms that I was experiencing because of the West Nile virus. But yeah, for me, it was a lot of sleep. I was sleeping again, 10, 12, even 14 hours a day.
Wow.
Is just a lack of motivation to exist really. And again, it's hard for me to separate how much of that is just being removed from the trail and how much of that was the fact that my head was in a really bad place. So my way to, I think, distract myself, give me a worthwhile project and a new goal to accomplish, which I think is a big part of the withdrawal from through hiking is, every day you're making progress toward this big goal. And I didn't want to go back to a world where it's just like, I'm spending 8 hours on a computer and there's nothing to show for it. So that was a big part of the reason why I wanted to write Appalachian Trials was it gave me a project and something to pursue. I never had ambitions for, it being a popular trail book. It was just, I did the best job that I could do with it. And I assumed that some friends and family and a few people that read my website might buy it. But, yeah, for me, it was just
it's an awesome book, no doubt.
Well,
and I shamelessly cribbed the title. And my book's My Appalachian Trial.
Yeah.
And it was entirely because I read Appalachian Trials. I knew it was going to be a trial, and it bloody well was.
Well,
and your book was certainly an inspiration. It certainly was an inspiration, no doubt. Now, I know you developed Appalachian Trials. What do you say, Bo? You say Appalachian or Appalachian?
I say Appalachian. I'm one of those dirty Yankees that gets it wrong.
I was told in the South I had to say Appalachian, so I've been saying it ever since.
Gotcha.
How did you develop Appalachian Trials, and now it's the Trek, I know, it used to be Appalachian Trials website, into your business? Because that's been quite a growth, hasn't it?
Yeah. So Appalachian Trials started merely as a book landing page for the book. And there was there was a very small blog component to it, and I would contribute content maybe once a month, sometimes a little bit more often than that. And I was noticing that the reception that these AT related posts were getting was far and beyond anything that I was ever getting with my personal site. And like at this point, my personal site was doing better than it ever had because there was a lot of interest in my hike. So I was kind of taken aback, especially like with the website was atrocious looking. The blog was, it was one of the most basic WordPress blogs. And like, I was the one that did the color scheme and like, it was bad. It was really, really bad. But despite the eyesore that it was was getting great traction. So,
it's all about the content. You know that it's all about the content, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That was my first real lesson in that. But, so I started to contribute more frequently. It started to be, every other week, every week. And then I had other people reach out about contributing on the website. And then before I knew it, there were a couple of current hikers blogging on the website.
That was your killer thing. That was the thing that really, really pushed it forward. I don't know about whether it pushed your business forward. It certainly pushed the website forward, allowing other people to contribute. There was so much variety on it, and it was a great resource straight away.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And, I have one very particular take on the trail. Like, how much does a 65-year-old woman, how much is she going to have in common with the way that I hike the trail? Like, I don't know.
Exactly.
So I've always looked for definitely a breadth in terms of experience. And like, I don't think there's one right way to approach the trail. So it's always been a focal point of me to get a diversity of opinion on it. But yeah, I mean,
well, that's exactly my rationale for this. That's my rationale for this podcast. I can't tell you the number of different people who've shot me how they've done the trail. One guy, one of my favourite guys, he took 3 days to do the approach trail. He still finished the bloody trail. I think it was amazing. You can't you can't be prescriptive about this trail. People need to realise they can get on it any time they like, at any stage of their life, and they can do it if they just keep working at it.
Yeah.
And that's what I think anyway.
3 days on the approach trail, that's dedication. Who was that, out of curiosity?
His name is Edwin Thullen, or Bear. He was 7 feet tall, 380 pounds.
Oh my God!
And yet he lost tons of weight. He completed the trail. It took him about 7 or 8 months, I think it was, but he completed it. I mean,
wow.
It was extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary.
I'm going to have to go listen to that podcast.
You were telling us about how it developed into your business, because this is now your full-time job, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So this was about probably 2012 that it started to take on this new life form of other people contributing to the website. I could just sense that there was something there to it. So at the time I was back working in the tech world, the work was better than what I was doing before the AT, but it wasn't an industry that I was passionate about. So I decided to quit and pursue the website full time. Things have just kind of snowballed ever since. So I think the next year we got 50 people who were blogging for the website, and it's kind of doubled somewhere in that range every single year since. So I think it was
that's awesome.
December of, forget if it's last year or 2 years ago. That's bad. I should know that we transitioned from Appalachian Trails to the Trek because the site kind of took on a natural evolution that, a lot of people follow the same path of once they hike the AT, what's next? The PCT. So, if it's not the PCT, it's the Colorado Trail, it's the Long Trail, it's the John Muir Trail, whatever it might be. The content started to evolve on its own, and people weren't taking us seriously because weren't taking that content seriously because the name of the URL had Appalachian in it. So I knew that we had kind of outgrown our skin. It was time for a change, and that's when the change happened.
Awesome. I think it was a smart idea because it gives you a wide variety of places you can go with it, doesn't it? It really does. Now, you clearly have a wide influence in the hiking community, and whether you deny it or not, so you did deny it when I spoke to you about this the other day. How do you hope to be able to wield that influence in the coming years? Do you have a vision or a plan with not only your business, but how you think the trail will develop? Yeah. And I am talking AT here, I must admit.
Right, sure. Yeah, I mean, like the overcrowding is a huge deal on the AT. And I see, my responsibility in this is promoting the right message for AT hikers and really any thru hiker and the forms of responsible hiking. So, I mean, different trails have different things that they advocate. So like on the AT, for instance, they're much bigger about promoting alternate style thru hiking, where they're trying to discourage people from doing the traditional northbound style thru hike and pushing them more towards southbound, flip-flop, you name it. PCT is a little bit different. I think the southern portion of the trail is a little bit more accommodating for big groups compared to up in Washington. But yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is just leading by example. Like I'm very adamant about not only picking up after myself, but if I see trash out on the trail, I'll pick it up. And I'm inspired by, the pack it out guys who were packing out, I think ended up being like over 1,000 pounds of trash on their through hike.
Amazing, isn't it? Absolutely amazing. Yeah, just incredible.
I'm in awe of those guys. I think what they're doing is amazing. And then the Granite Gear started the groundskeeper sponsorship, where they're now giving backpacks and other gear to, I think it's like 20 different hikers, and encouraging them to pack out trash. So I think promoting those messages, not only the leave no trace aspect is the biggest one, but encouraging people not to be an asshole in town, which is a serious problem on the AT. And,
it's a technical term we use. Yeah.
Yeah. You hear it all the time from hostel owners and trail angels and whatever it might be, that there's a sense of entitlement amongst thru hikers. And, the website probably plays a role in that because, we're reiterating all these ideas about trail magic. So people go out into the trail expecting trail magic. So I also see our responsibility.
It is our responsibility, but funnily enough, some of the stuff, and I've said this before, I think, on the show, but I'm saying this to you personally, I think Facebook, while it's fantastic for loads of things, it's terrible for this sort of stuff. It reports bad behaviour all the time, and the vast, vast majority of people are not badly behaved on the trail, and nobody ever reports on the great behaviour
Right.
And so it seems like there's more bad behaviour than there's good behaviour. But, I went to trail days last year and not one person was nasty or rude to me. They were friendly. So I think it may be over-exaggerated, some of this bad behaviour, but the going into town thing I know is an issue, because I know when I went into town a few times, I've been a drinker all my life, so I do know the issues with drink, and some people drink too much in town. As soon as they do that, they get badly behaved. So,
right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a real issue, and I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges of the growing northbound bubble is like it's impossible. Like the more people there are, the more there tends to be that sort of atmosphere. So. Yeah, it's a real challenge. I'm definitely in contacts with the people at the ATC, and I work with them closely, and spreading the right message. But yeah, cool. I mean, it's a real challenge, and it's something that we take seriously. I wrote a post a couple years ago called the Thru Hikers Code of Conduct. It's something that we share every year. We try to get that in front of anyone that's going to hit the trail. By and large, we find the people that are blogging for us and the people that read our stuff to be more responsible hikers than I think the exceptions that you just touched on. So that's the challenge is, the people that aren't, that are going onto the trail for the party, that aren't reading these articles, like how do you reach them? And not only how do you reach them, but how do you change their behavior?
There's still the responsibility of people on the trail, by setting a good example themselves and making people feel bad about behaving badly. I mean, it's a tough thing to do. It's a tough thing to do, but it's certainly a message that's important to get out there.
Certainly. Yeah, hikers will have to self-police themselves.
They certainly will. Now, thanks so much for doing this. I've been wanting to speak to you for some time, and I'm so glad we got to speak, and I can publicly thank you for giving me the title of my book, so that's even better.
Well, I'm flattered that you use that, and Steve, thanks so much for your time. It was wonderful chatting with you.
Good talking to you. Speak to you soon. All the best.
Take care.
Bye. One thing that really got me about Zach, as you could probably tell from the interview, was his intuitive grasp of the importance of mindset. I mean, I'd heard before how important the mental aspect was, but I hadn't really prepared for it meaningfully. Zach knew, somehow, how critical it was to prepare himself for the bad days, which, of course, by the way, there are always several. I knew the importance of knowing your why, but hadn't really looked at it in the context of hiking the AT. And getting West Nile virus. I don't know about knowing his why. He was probably wondering, why me? That question of mine about how he wields his influence was quite an important one for somebody like Zach. The internet has given a bunch of disparate characters considerable power, not least in the hiking world. Zach seemed to be a really level-headed bloke, and for me, he struck just the right note. Leave no trace and behave yourself in town are pretty good places to start and influence people. If you're thinking about hiking the AT or any other long-distance hike, you could do worse than reading Zach's book, Appalachian Trails. We've got a few more 5-star reviews this past week or so. Pat of Michigan says that Mighty Blue finds a way to explore new perspectives and capture my imagination. Thanks, Pat. Good to know that I'm doing what I set out to do. AT 2025, now there's a clue in the name, says that he or she will be 49 in 2025 when I'm finally able to get out on the trail. AT 2025 goes on to say, each new episode has me whistling along with the intro music and always disappointed when the podcast is over. What a lovely thought it is to think that I may be out on a hike one day and will suddenly hear my intro music being whistled in the woods. That would be quite a moment, let me tell you. Oh dear. Last but not least, Michelle B. is an AT section hiker who has already done Katahdin. She goes on to say, I have learned a great deal from this podcast and I've literally changed many of my hiking habits and have lightened my load by about 7 pounds based on Steve's interviews and information. So pleased that we're having such a positive impact, Michelle. Thanks for all of those. I love to get them, as well as your emails. Some of the emails I receive are so personal, yet they reflect the impact our guests are having on lovers of the AT. Please keep them coming and tell me about any ideas you may have for the show in 2018. Now, we've got Vince Robichaud on to tell us a little bit about his hiking and cooking in the woods. Here's Vince. Okay, I'm on with Vince Robichaud. He is the owner and inventor of Trailtopia. Hi, Vince. How are you?
Hi, good. I'm great today.
Well, first of all, thanks so much for supporting the show. We couldn't be more pleased, and we particularly couldn't be more pleased because you very kindly sent me some samples, which so far have been great. I'm thoroughly enjoying them, and I'm wondering if you could tell me, how did it start? How did Trailtopia get started?
Well, I've been making backpacking or camping food for my friends and family when we go on hiking trips for quite a few years. I have a really strong interest in the outdoors and a love for cooking, so it just kind of was a natural fit for us to
winning combination. Yeah,
to put both of those together. And certainly friends and family appreciated it when I was cooking for them on the trail and bringing along really good food. And in 2013, we were on a hiking trip in the Sawtooth Mountains of Idaho, and the group that I was with, said, "Hey, you should really, sell this product to everyone because it's really, really good." And I challenged them to come up with a name during that trip, and we brainstormed about lots of different names, and Trailtopia was one that came up, and that really struck a chord with me. So I was able then to immediately said, "Well, you guys picked the name." I said I would do it, and I just dove in and started really kind of looking at what it would take to make this food commercially. And so that took quite a bit of thought, and effort,
I'm sure,
in trying to scale that from personal use to commercial use.
Of course. Now, do you think of different ways in which you try to differentiate yourself from some of the competition out there? Because there are a bunch of companies out there, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, besides making really good food, I mean, one of our goals was to make food that I would eat at home and not just on the trail. So the food quality had to be was really key. But then we thought, okay, what other problems do we have when we're on the trail and we're making food? And one of those was the depth of the bags that were available to us. You typically have the bag that's taller than it is wide.
Yes.
It requires, and actually sell an extra long spork so that doesn't make your hand messy, and which still didn't work very good. Or you had to cut the bag down after it was cooked, and you really couldn't eat out of them easily. So I wasn't a fan of doing dishes in the backcountry and having to pour everything out into bowls. So we looked at that as an opportunity to make an improvement, and we custom designed our bags to be short and wide so that it makes it really easy for you to stir them, and get rid of the corners so that the powders aren't getting trapped in the corners when you're trying to mix it up, and then of course to eat directly out of the bag. And so bags are essentially turned sideways, so they're wider than they are tall.
That's right. That's noticeable straight away. As soon as you kindly sent me some, and that was noticeable. And it was one of those smack your head moments. Think, what did anybody else think of that?
Yeah, and so that really made a difference in getting rid of we custom designed the bags. So we worked with a bag manufacturer, and we designed the bags to fit the product as best as we could. So we have multiple size bags that fit, or attempt to fit a particular product as well as we can without having excess or having too many bag sizes for us to carry.
Sure.
And and it's worked out really, really well. And so there's no hidden corners. It's easy to mix. It's very easy to eat straight out of the bag. You lick your spoon and you're done with dishes essentially.
Trail food. You can't love it, haven't you? As listeners to my shows tend to know that I do a bit of cyber stalking, and obviously I looked through your website, and one of the things that struck me was, particularly if you're vegetarian stuff, you have hemp seed protein, and being ignorant about that sort of thing, what's that all about?
Yeah, this is something new that we introduced in 2017. We were looking to expand our product line to add vegetarian. We'd already added gluten-free versions in many of our food products right from the very beginning. But in this case, we were looking to make vegetarian, and we looked at a number of different protein replacements for meat instead of the meat. And beef proteins and some of the other ones just don't work. Soy, people have allergies to. And the hemp seed seemed to be a really good balance. It has a good quantity of protein in it, and it has a really good quantity of healthy oils that bump up the calorie count in the meals, which is always challenging in freeze-dried dried food because they tend to be very, very low fat. And the hemp
Yes.
seed adds calories, adds the protein, and doesn't really impart any negative flavors at all. So I'm really happy with the use of the hemp seed and how that's working in our products, and it's a good calorie booster.
Yeah. Well, funny enough, another thing on your website, which people should really go and look at, trailtopia.com, and look under the planning and nutrition section on the guide, because you've got a downloadable food planner as well as a nutrition guide. And the food planner has some great little tips and tricks, and you can literally plan your food on the trail. And so that's people can just go there and download that and just see what the ideas Vince is putting into play. And was that for a reason, or just to that's a little mini giveaway you give to people? What's the rationale behind doing that?
It's a little mini giveaway that we give to people, and we hand these out in every one of our orders. We put one into the order. We hand them out at our retailers that we sell at, so they distribute them in the store as well. And for me, planning food is an important aspect of any trip, especially when you're planning for a larger group. If you've got more than 4 or more people, then you really need to make sure you're planning food well. You don't want to carry too much, and you don't want to carry too little. In either case. And the food planner just gives you a daily kind of schedule layout where you can say, this is what we're going to do for breakfast and lunch and dinner and snacks and desserts. And always a big fan of desserts on the trail. And, it's just very easy for people to use and maybe get a little bit more organized than they might have been in the past. It's just a simple tool that I've used for years and thought I would just share it with people.
Nice. Now, I know you're not just supporting the show, for which we are truly grateful, just to get your name out there, because you also support A Year in the Wilderness and Save Boundary Waters. So you're putting your money where your mouth is. Tell us a few things about A Year in the Wilderness and Save Boundary Waters.
Sure. Yeah, we definitely are a supporter of all things outdoors, and really are care about the environment quite a lot. And here in Minnesota, where we're based, there is an effort to what they call, quote, save the boundary waters from sulfide mining on the edges of the wilderness area. Sulfide mining can pollute waterways, which then run into the boundary waters, which has a very large interconnected series of lakes and rivers. So there's a lot of concern that mining could potentially pollute a large area. So the Save the Boundary Waters was Dave and Amy Freeman, who really went out into the wilderness for a whole year. They went in at the end of September of 2016, and came out the end of September of 2017. And,
oh my God!
and so they went through the winter. So they were canoeing and kayaking and dog sledding in the winter. Really and their goal was to raise awareness and raise money to support the efforts to save the boundary waters from the sulfide mining, and really raise awareness. So that fit really well into my thinking and my environmental activities. And so we supported them by providing them Trailtopia food and money for their year in the wilderness. So we were one sponsor, and but we gave them a day's worth of food for every week they were out there, and then supported them with quite a bit of cash donations as well.
That's superb. There it is. So what's to wrap up? What's the next step for Trailtopia?
Well, I mean, we're still trying to gain awareness of our products out there and and get the name out. I think we've got great products, and that really differentiate themselves from the competitors. Great food in great bags that really help the end user or and the hiker get out there. Our goal is always to promote more people getting outdoors and enjoying the outdoors best they can. We're very active in a number of different ways to do that, I really hope that Trailtopia makes a difference out there for hikers. We continue to have that ethic of having great food and convenient packaging, and really want to help make people's experiences better out in the wilderness.
That's lovely. And in fact, your About page says that you've got 40 years of outdoor adventure experience, a taste for good food, and a vault of family recipes. So you're always going to be doing this at some stage in your life, weren't you? So I'm so glad you brought it to fruition for us as well.
I have no shortage of recipes and recipe ideas. Sometimes I have to curb my enthusiasm with coming out with new recipes.
I'm sure.
The choices can't be too large, and we have to be able to sustain our business as well.
Exactly. Well, look, once again, thanks so much. And thanks for talking to us today. Gives people a bit more of an idea about Trailtopia. They're hearing the ads, and hopefully they're going to be liking the ads, and they're going to try out the stuff. And even if you just go to the website and look at the food planner, that is well worth the visit. But thanks very much indeed for talking to us, Vince, and hopefully we'll catch up again soon.
Thank you so much.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
So there we are. Vince doesn't just support our show, he supports the outdoor warriors who are supporting the environment in the best way they know how. He really does put his money where his mouth is, so hope that you support Vince too at trailtopia.com. As many of you probably know, Vince also supports our other show, where we follow this year's Jesser, Bruce Matson, as he prepares to leave in just a couple of months. The show is returning to Katahdin and well worth half an hour of your time every Monday morning. Next week, we've got Nate and Sharon Harrington. If the name seems familiar, we met Nate and Sharon at Trail Days earlier this year. The two of them are the Hiking Vikings. They had a stall at Trail Days selling Nate's wonderful Katahdin sign replicas, one of which now stands proudly with my own summit picture on my desk. Nate and Sharon have quite their personal story, and they'll be sharing it with you next week. Earl Schaefer continues to push forward this week in the conclusion of Chapter 4 of Walking with Spring. He quickly passes through the wonderfully named Big Butt, immediately hitting briars and barbed wire. He waxes lyrical with a poem and wanders through an area of farms that seem to transport him back 100 years. I'll see you next week. Believe it or not, as I turned away, the clarion call of an eagle sounded overhead. Though northward bound, the AT trends southward from Big Butt, coming down to Devil's Fork Gap. Beyond was rugged hill country, with many steep slopes cleared for farming or grazing. John Fox Jr., author of the folk classic Trail of the Lonesome Pine, must have meant such terrain when telling of a man who fell out of his cornfield and broke his leg. Fences were plentiful, more crossed in one afternoon than in all the previous hiking. Each was a major hurdle, consisting of a pyramidal-style rail fence grown thick with briars and usually reinforced with barbed wire. Testing each strand of wire or weathered rail in turn, one must inch carefully toward the summit, then descend the far side, trying to avoid the almost inevitable catastrophe when something breaks and drops the intrepid backpacker upon rails, briars and wire. I dubbed this the briar and barbed wire country. According to the Little Black Notebook, my feet began hurting during the afternoon. I bathed in a stream, reached a road crossing at dusk, and stopped by a spring in a pine woods nearby. Traffic was heavy, this being Sunday evening. I felt a little lonesome, so near and yet so far from everybody. The next day brought more briars and decrepit fences and then a high, grassy knoll. The view from topside was definitely springtime. Surrounding valleys were snow-white with dogwood. On the back trail were the hill farms I had crossed so laboriously. Beyond the knoll were brushy grasslands, with the weather turning windy and cloudy. Finding the way became difficult, with marking faint and mostly on rocks. Cattle trails in every direction were confusing. Once a pair of scarlet tanagers appeared ahead, flashing red as they flitted through the trees, keeping just far enough ahead to prevent pictures. The tanager is one of the shyest and most beautiful of all songbirds. Toward evening, the trail entered forest again, some of it rhododendron grown to the size of small trees, with trunks at least a foot in diameter. Then, abruptly, the path dropped into the gorge of the Nolichucky River at Unaka Springs. The Chucky, as it is affectionately known to local people, is a beautiful stream, flowing west to a juncture with the French Broad River in Tennessee. Its headwaters also come from the Mitchell area, but from the opposite side of the mountain. According to legend, one of the earliest settlements of the Cherokees was in the beautiful valley of the Nolichucky. My camp that night was in Lost Cove, near an abandoned house near the river. Whippoorwills came so close their eyes glowed red in the firelight and their calls were deafening. Scribbled in the little black notebook is the following. Chucky Blue. By the river Nollichucky, streaming in by a brimful flow, when the shadow shapes move darkly, in the fading campfire glow, there's a face appears before me of a girl I'll some day know, with her lips half smiling shyly and her lashes drooping low. Then the forest seems to murmur with a voice in every tree, by the shore of Chucky River, by the hills of Tennessee. And I seem to hear her whisper this melancholy plea, Whither art thou, forest rover? Will you ever come to me? From the Nollichucky Gorge, the AT followed a side valley to Curly Maple Gap and then the open crest of Unaka Mountain. An outstanding viewpoint is Beauty Spot, an unusually scenic bald with panoramic views. Much of Unaka Mountain had burned more than 20 years before, leaving many thousands of acres of desolation. Sometimes no more than blackened rocks and charred stumps birched on taproots remained. Thickets of briars were the only new growth. Marking was almost nil. Once I started on a beeline across some tedious switchback, more suitable for pack animals, but turned back to the road when a large black snake slithered from underfoot. A sign at the top mentioned Rattlesnake Ridge. Once, while crossing a gap where trees still grew, I saw smoke ahead and expected to encounter a forest fire, but it was a man and a boy burning brush while clearing an area for pasture. The same day I recall seeing a buzzard rise ahead and found the bones and shriveled skin of a black snake that must have been at least 10 feet long. Finally, the burned area merged with sprouts and then a remnant of pine forest in a ravine leading down to the village of Limestone Cove. At a grocery store, the man was familiar with the trail and pointed to a battered sign on a fence post across the road. He was amazed that I had gotten this far without guidebooks. On down the road at another store, a customer said the trail followed the Simile Creek Road, but some said it followed the ridgetop. I chased that ridgetop rumour and spent the night under some pines, then wandered around on various roads, about 4 feet wide, through old-style hill farms. It was like stepping back 100 years. The fields were incredibly steep and rocky, causing me to wonder how anyone could make even a meagre living on such tip-tilted terrain. At one place, a man was loosening ground with an old bull-tongue plough. Turning down one of the sledge roads, I came to a little old schoolhouse where the road widened to wagon size. It was recess time. The youngsters acted as though they had never seen a man carrying a pack. All playing ceased while they lined up along the bank to watch silently until some of the girls began to titter. That stretch of road seemed mighty long. Farther down was Simile Creek Road, which I should have followed in the first place. A few minutes later, a teenage boy on a bicycle overtook me and slowed alongside. We talked as though we had known each other for years. After several miles, he said, "Well, this is where I live," turned into a yard and said, "We'll be seeing you," then turned to glance back and added in a low voice, "Though I know I never will." The memory of that parting, after so brief an acquaintance, has haunted me ever since. Near Hampton, I stopped to shave with water from Simile Creek. My boots had worn very thin, and I hoped to find a cobbler in town, and did. He half-soled my boots while I lunched on cookies and milk obtained at the grocery counter in the same building. I wanted to try walking without heels, as the Indians did, so told him not to replace them. He finally agreed, but joined the growing list of people who doubted my sanity. He and everyone else in the town seemed to know nothing about the Appalachian Trail, not even that it went through as indicated on my road map. I started northward at the crossroads and passed the side of Watauga Dam, then under construction, with heavy equipment on all sides. Upstream, the land had been cleared to waterline and hundreds of families were moving out. A grocery and service station was still operating, and I stopped for information, suspecting the trail lay beyond the long, high ridge to my left. The proprietor conferred with several customers, then reckoned a trail went up the mountain, but no one knew what shape it was in. But all agreed there was an old cabin part way up where I could stay the night. Rain began falling as I started off. At the foot of the mountain, a man coming out of a house said he was just visiting friends and didn't know about the trail, then added with a sardonic grin, "That's a mighty big mountain you're heading for, son." A pall of cloud closed in, and the trail faded at the old cabin, which was padlocked. Sleeping on the ramshackle porch was damp and draughty, but far better than the rain-drenched woods. In the morning I tried desperately to bushwhack upward, knowing the crest must be no more than a quarter mile away, but it was hopeless. The man at the store agreed, and for an instant only I contemplated another try. Meanwhile, the store stove was roaring hot, and I kept turning to dry out evenly. Later on, as the rain was easing, a dilapidated car stopped for gas, and the driver agreed to carry me back to Hampton. I wondered whether the old bucket of bolts would last that far. Most of the windows were gone, replaced with cardboard. Most of the upholstery was missing, and at least 2 cylinders were not firing. He made room in the back for me and the pack, amidst jutting coil springs and tattered fabric. Then he stopped at a rural barroom along the way for beer and slot machines. The machine was jammed several times as he fed it nickels, but always unjammed after the bartender whacked it with a chunk of wood he kept handy. The bartender shrugged in disgust when I ordered soda. Later we rattled and lurched into Hampton, where I thanked the man emphatically, then started west from the crossroads. Soon a road branched north, and a battered sign indicated the lone expedition was back on track after a full day lost in the hinterlands. Later, as I hurried along, a car approached from the rear. It was Reverend Lloyd Greer of Damascus, Virginia. We talked a bit, and then he offered up a prayer for my well-being and the success of my long trek. A few hours later, he came by in the opposite direction and stopped to tell me to write him and let him know how I was getting along. The sun finally came out as I reached Watauga River, this time on the proper side of the mountain. Near the bridge in the rapids was an old-time undershot water wheel, probably used to irrigate the nearby bottomlands. Farther along were a settlement and a small schoolhouse behind a wire fence. A car came along and stopped, letting off a young lady who turned toward the schoolhouse, probably the schoolmarm. The gate, a typical Southland type, consisting of an extra post secured by 2 wire loops, seemed to be stuck. She glanced helplessly in my direction. Unfortunately, the local Peck's bad boy must have jammed that gate, and getting it open was an embarrassing struggle. At the grocery store, a small dog came yapping and nipping ferociously until called off by the storekeeper. I bought the only jar of honey in stock, so old the man didn't know how much to charge for it. He said most everyone had their own gums and didn't buy store honey. Watauga Valley has quite a history. It was one of the earliest settlements of Scotch-Irish who had migrated south from Pennsylvania and displaced the Cherokees. When English and Indian forces invaded the area during the Revolution, the settlers banded together to win the Battle of Kings Mountain, the decisive battle in the southern mountain region under the leadership of John Sevier. The Watauga settlements declared independence and had a written constitution long before the rest of the country. Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett ventured west from Watauga Valley. A major relocation now takes the Appalachian Trail east of Hampton through the beautiful Laurel Fork Gorge with its large waterfall and over spectacular Roan Mountain. To the east is Grandfather Mountain, visited by the naturalist Michaud and described by him as the highest mountain in all America. It rises high from valley level, but not that high. The old route continued up Watauga Valley, finally turning into timberland. Marking was good, and I hastened on, looking for shelter, and came to a small ramshackle lean-to. Rain began and the roof leaked, but the most unfortunate thing about the shelter was the mouse that peeked from a cranny. I was forewarned, but thought the pack would be safe next to my head. The little rascal was bolder than expected, and managed to chew a hole in my waterproof bag, leaving souvenirs and everything, including the salt. Most of my supplies had to be thrown away. Not being in haste to reach a store, I covered at least 20 miles on Holston Mountain and finally slept in a Forest Service shed at Maple Springs. The night was windy and cold, and I rose at dawn to hurry the few remaining miles to Damascus, over in Virginia. The nomad life of the woods had now become my routine existence. I had come a total of 420 miles, averaging about 16 per day. Only a serious mishap could stop me now. The long cruise was well underway.